Good afternoon. My name is Ken Cross and I'm running for the office of President of the United States. The topic of today's video is saving Medicare. Have you ever wished that things would just stay pretty much the same for a while and not change? I have. In fact, there are many old wise sayings that have to do with change, such as, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, leave well enough alone. People would do well to heed such advice in general. So why make changes to the Medicare program when it is a program that the elderly now very much enjoy and appreciate? The problem is that right now the Medicare program is not in good enough shape to just leave as it is. However, with a few minor adjustments, the Medicare program can be saved and strengthened for current and future generations. As a start point, a few facts need to be stated about Medicare. Fact 1. The Medicare payroll tax of 1.45% paid by employees and matched by the employers currently bring in about $2.25 billion per year into the federal government. In addition, charges for Medicare beneficiary premiums that are subtracted from Social Security checks bring in roughly $75 billion more in revenues for Medicare a given year. So the 225 plus 75 is roughly about $300 billion that Social Security or that Medicare has coming in. The yearly cost of Medicare right now is approximately $550 billion. So where does the other $250 billion come from? It comes from the federal government general revenues right now according to current law. What that means is that the federal government subsidizes with tax dollars collected or monies borrowed the Medicare program for it to work by $250 billion a year every year. For a reference point, in 2015, the total corporate taxes collected amounted to $350 billion. So really total corporate taxes collected for all the complaints by corporations is really only $100 billion more than the amount that Medicare has to be subsidized right now. The Medicare Trust Fund is currently projected to be depleted by 2030. After then, Medicare revenues will be able to cover about 86% of the full benefit amounts. It is possible for hospital inpatient benefit amounts to run out with Medicare, and a lot of people don't realize that. I found that out as I was taking care of a relative. You could check with Medicare. It's not really too difficult to do. The benefit periods that they talk about in Medicare are not solid 90-day benefit periods. Any stays in the hospital during that window count as part of the 90 days. So you use up that span fairly quickly in your later years, possibly. The next fact is that when prescription drug Medicare Part D when the prescription drug Medicare Part D donut hole is reached, individuals must pay about the retail price of prescription drugs. My proposed solution to saving and strengthening Medicare is as follows. First, merge parts A, B, and D together. There's no need to have them all separate. It's confusing and a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork. We should only merge them into one. We could call them Medicare Part A so new cards wouldn't have to be issued. Second, establish a total annual deductible of $500 for the new merged Part A. Right now, the deductible for just Part A hospitalization is over $1,000, several hundred for Part B, and an additional amount for Part D. So the deductible would be less under my plan than it currently is. Third, after the $500 deductible has been met, Medicare recipients would pay 20% of any Medicare cost or drug cost up to a maximum amount of $6,000. The 20% pay amounts would encourage patients to question procedures that are being conducted. Without getting specific to who the relatives were, I've talked with relatives who went in for a clear problem, and instead of just addressing that problem, they had problems with other organs checked out, heart, esophagus, intestinal areas, and I asked why, and they said, well, I guess it's okay, I don't pay anyway, and they're just giving me a general to check everything over, I guess. That's what causes the Medicare fund and the Medicare monies expended to be so high, is that there doesn't seem to be enough care on the part of patients with the current program to prevent potential abuses. And I'm not saying that occurs a lot, I don't know to the degree, but I know it does occur some. And if the patients had some stake in the game, then they might be inclined to question procedures that don't appear to relate to their particular symptoms or problems. Of the plan that I have, the $6,000 maximum seems to have the most negative reaction by people I've talked to. That $6,000 is just a maximum. That you wouldn't have to have that. The 20% could go on beyond that. But I set a maximum so that no one, even with $100,000 of medical expenses, would have to be concerned about more than $6,000. In order to have to pay $6,000, you would have to incur $30,000 of medical expenses in a year, because 20% of $30,000 is $6,000. And my wife just had shoulder surgery and some other medical problems and didn't go anywhere near 30,000 some. So the idea there is that is established as a stake in the ground in which no one for a given year would have to pay any more than that. The question is, should people have to pay some? The idea is that Medicare is that people would have coverage for medical problems, not that with the contributions they make over the year that 100% is covered. Even now, Part B is 80% is covered and 20% has to be paid by the patient. So the plan is to simplify and to have an approach where the patient does pay some money, but that the sum is marginal. The fourth step is that individuals would have an option of buying a supplemental insurance policy to cover up to 100% of the cost that Medicare does not cover. So people could buy, as I have right now because I have Medicare, they could buy a supplemental policy to cover that deductible and the 20%. So we still have that option. And some would say, well, why do we even have Medicare? Why don't we just have private insurance and people save and pay that amount? The problem is, just like with Social Security, people did not, in past years before Medicare was created, save enough. And even in my own situation, with medical cost rising, I'm a professional engineer. I earned a lot of money. I put a lot into 401ks, but nevertheless, my Social Security that I received would barely cover a insurance policy that was equivalent to Medicare right now. So we have to recognize that medical costs will keep climbing and most people won't adequately prepare. So to avoid a situation where we have many elderly without adequate medical attention. I believe Medicare is a good program. The question is just strengthening it and making it a viable program for patients now or beneficiaries and beneficiaries to come. The current payroll tax for each employee by my plan would be raised from 1.45% to 1.9%. Nobody likes increases in taxes, but we have to recognize if the program is spending more than we're collecting, it's appropriate that the tax amount be raised to cover the cost. As the individuals who would pay the additional 0.45% matched by employers would be aging, they will likely have more sophisticated and more elaborate life extension procedures than they have right now. And so to have Medicare function in the long run, it's appropriate that those paying tax now pay a little more. So the idea of saving Medicare shouldn't be just that the people that are younger pay more tax and that there's no concession on the people receiving Medicare. The people receiving Medicare would have a little bit of an obligation to try to keep costs down by the 20% pay amount for the Medicare Part A that it would be created. The maximum number of lifetime reserved days for hospital inpatient care right now is 60 days, and I would double that to 120 days. A lot of people think they would never use that, but the idea of insurance is to protect against that extreme situation, and there would be very few who would be that would apply to, but for those who do, you want some comfort that you're not going to have to be covering your medical expenses out of your own pocket, 100% of them. The seventh point is Medicare would aggressively identify and prosecute those providers who are guilty of Medicare fraud. We have a big aversion for anything to do with crimes that are committed with any type of weapon. If somebody who is of poor means robs a 7-Eleven with a gun and steals $300, they might get 7 years in prison for armed robbery. However, there are people that commit white-collar crimes of a great, huge magnitude greater that have much more devastating effects, such as the individual Bernie Madoff, who stole so much money of people's in a Ponzi scheme, and they were deprived of their savings on which to survive when they got older. So I don't think that white-collar crime should be treated gently just because there's not a gun involved, because the impact of those crimes is just as damaging. And so we need to have tough laws regarding Medicare fraud and prosecution. 8, Medicare beneficiaries could continue to have a safety net of Medicaid if their financial conditions would enable them to qualify. So even in the case in this country where someone had some money and they had serious medical problems which had caused them to lose their wealth and their assets, in the worst case, if they dropped down to Medicaid, Medicaid would be picked up for care in a nursing home. It would be picked up for medical costs. So we don't have a situation where a person is going to have serious medical difficulties that aren't attended to in this country. We're only asking that people that in the middle class that may have stocks and investments cover some of their cost with those investments as opposed to covering so much of it with Medicare as we do now with Part A, where there's a little over $1,000 deductible for the first 60 days in a hospital. That care is better than what you can get as a working individual in the private sector. So we need to understand, since Medicare is running a deficit, that we need to try to bring revenues and expenses into alignment if we want to continue to maintain and have Medicare available in the future. My suggested solutions to the problems facing the Medicare program are simple enough to be easily understood. I know I've moved through them fast, but they could be looked at. They're not complicated. They're fair, more fair than what we have now, and they will eliminate the donut hole in the prescription drugs, which for a lot of people is very detrimental. They might have cancer or something, they enter that, and they have to pay huge amounts. That would be relieved as a problem. And more importantly, it would extend the projected date of benefit coverage beyond 2030. The exact amount could be calculated by the Medicare Board of Trustees, but clearly by being responsible for a little more of the expenses and increasing some of the payroll amount, we would strengthen Medicare in the long run. I will now discuss some additional important specific healthcare considerations. My approach to healthcare is expressed in the following 6 statements. The first statement is, I would allow Medicare to negotiate prescription drug costs in order for them to be reduced. I worked as a consultant at Upjohn in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Later became Pharmacy and then Pfizer. They merged. But the point is, I talked with the people there in production, and the most of the cost with producing a given product is for cleaning and filling the vats, making the right combination of mixtures to produce the product, and setting it up and then producing the product. While they're producing the product, they can produce a great deal of it, but then if they don't have a market for a great deal, they don't want to store a lot, they have to stop, take everything down, and make another medicine. So if Medicare could negotiate, it would save money for Medicare, would save money for the manufacturers because they could run bigger volumes and they could make more money, and it would save money for the Medicare beneficiaries. So that's an obvious thing to do. I don't know why we're not doing that now, but that's what we should do. The second statement is that I'm opposed to a single-payer national health care program. For one, it would be too expensive. We're running negative now, and to include the programs such as Medicare for everyone would put us even in deeper trouble or increase the federal debt. I encourage you to look at my video on federal debt. I'm opposed to a single payer program, and one of the reasons I'm opposed to it is it would reduce the incentive to work. If you provide somebody with health insurance, if you provide food stamps for food, if you provide housing support, then and their needs are met, a lot of people have less incentive to go out. Some people have work ethic and go out anyway, but some would just go along and not contribute. So I think that it's important to understand the significance of incentives. And the free enterprise system as dependent upon the incentives and the work opportunities that are available. A individual said to me once that Jesus Christ was a communist, and I said, what a strange thing to say. Why would you say that? He's not a communist, he's a capitalist. I said, Matthew 25:14 through 30 is a story where an owner left and gave 5 talents, which is the money then, to one servant, 2 to another, and 1 to another, and then returned, and the first servant doubled the money from 5 to 10, the second one doubled from 2 to 4, but the third one did nothing because they just buried the money. So in the story that Jesus is telling, the owner says, you wicked and lazy worker, you didn't do anything to contribute. So the point is, even 2,000 years ago, with a very caring leader in Jesus Christ, he made a strong statement that we should be working, we should have incentive to work, and we should have jobs available, which you could check my jobs video to see how those jobs would be created. The point is that there is greater wealth for all people when the most number of people are working. The people working make more money, and the society doesn't have to carry as much of a burden to carry them along and support them. So the thing of it is, the universal health care is an unfair program and does not provide enough incentive, because the people who work hard and contribute the most would be getting the same sort of coverage as someone who's contributing little or nothing. I am opposed to privatizing Medicare. People would not save enough for insurance after retirement. I would continue with the Affordable Care Act so as to avoid drastic changes in health care upon taking office. Mentioned earlier that change is important, good change, positive change, but it should be done methodically in a way that is not too disruptive to society. So I believe that if Congress offered any proposed improvements to the Affordable Care Act or developed a suitable replacement for it, I would thoughtfully evaluate the proposed changes before signing them into law. I would strengthen Medicare by extending its long-term financial adequacy. 6, I would not raise the Medicare eligibility age, which one of the primary candidates is now doing. In conclusion, about my topic about saving Medicare, we can save Medicare. I believe it's a good program for the country, and I don't believe it's just a case of saving it because the impact to society would be too extreme if we tried to do something different. We should save it because it's a good program that is beneficial. For your time, goodbye.